All right. Can everyone see my screen? Anyone just give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right. So welcome to JavaScript and the DOM masterclass for this evening. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'll take you through some of the things that I know about JavaScript and the DOM and hopefully give you a bit of an understanding about what that is before you jump into JavaScript and React over the next few weeks. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ben. I am a senior front-end engineer at a software engineering consultancy called ThinkMill. We're based out in Sydney, but I work remotely here in Perth. Spending most of my day working with JavaScript and React. So hopefully you're in good hands. If you want to reach out to me with any questions that you might have on Slack, my handle is @BenMentor. So this evening, we're going to go through a quick overview of what is JavaScript, what the DOM is, and some of the advanced use cases of JavaScript. So we'll be covering the basics today, but there's a lot more that you can use JavaScript for. And I'll also point you in the direction of some of my favorite resources. So what is JavaScript? First of all, JavaScript is not Java. Let's leave that mistake for the recruiters. JavaScript is its own language and nothing to do with Java. JavaScript is a programming language, just like Python is, but JavaScript's strength is that it makes websites interactive. So what's that mean? If we imagine a website as a house, we've got our HTML, which would be the house itself, the structure, the layout, the rooms, the doors, the windows, everything that you can that makes the structure of a house. Our CSS would be how we decorate that house. It's the interior design, it's the paint on the outside, it's everything that makes the house what it is. Then JavaScript would be the thing that enables us to interact with that house. It's how we would turn on a light, we would move the furniture or run a tap. It's the things that connect. It's the wiring between the plumbing and the actual tap itself. So when we stack it up against Python, it's not a competition. Both are good, but they excel in different areas. Python is great for back-end development, whereas JavaScript is much better for creating interactive and responsive front-end interfaces. Python only runs on the server, whereas JavaScript runs natively in our web browser, but we could also run it on the server. So it's a little bit more flexible. Python actually has a much simpler and more readable syntax. So JavaScript's a little bit more complex, but that's because we need to support both that server and the client-side environment. Good news is though, both programming languages are considered to be super beginner-friendly, and that is exactly why we cover them in cheat codes. So I'll just show you in code some of those differences. So on my left here, I have a Python file, and on my right, I have a JavaScript file. Both of these files do exactly the same thing. They're just in their different languages. So in Python, if we want to declare a variable, we simply just type the name of our variable equals, and then give it a value. We do that for a string, a number, a float, or a Boolean. Whereas in JavaScript, what we do is we use two different keywords, either let or const, to declare our variables. So for example, I could say let my variable equal hello JavaScript as a string. And then we finish off our line of JavaScript with a semicolon. So you can see there's just a little bit more complexity there because we need to add the keyword and the semicolon at the end. We also have const. So we have let and const. A let means that we would declare this variable as something that we could change. So for example, here I have let my variable equal hello JavaScript. I could come along and just say my variable equals hello world. So I can reassign that variable. Whereas with a const, it's considered a constant. I can't change this. This would throw an error if we were to try and do this in run this code, because I've told JavaScript I want this to be a constant. There's also one other way that we can define a variable in JavaScript, but we don't use it anymore. And I'll go over that in just a little bit, but you may see this when you're working with some JavaScript, and that is by using the var keyword. So it's this is an old way to declare variables. Okay, it's still perfectly valid JavaScript and it will work, but we don't use it anymore. It basically is very similar to a let. It can be reassigned. Moving on from variables, we have arrays, or in Python, we call them lists. So a list in Python is declared with a name equals square brackets, and then the values inside that list. In JavaScript, it's the same, except we call them arrays in JavaScript. We declare it with a const or a let, my array, and then the square brackets with the values and that semicolon at the end. We also access elements in those arrays in the same way. So just by saying the name of the list and then the index of that item, very much the same. The next thing we have is objects. In JavaScript is called a dictionary in Python. So what you know as a dictionary is actually an object in JavaScript. So we declare it with a name, a value, name, value, key. We call this the key and this the value. We have the same in Python. Accessing keys is slightly different. We can use the dot notation in JavaScript. So we can say my object dot key. And in Python, we say my dictionary, square brackets, the key name, and close the square bracket to access it. You can actually also do that in JavaScript. So you can say my object, and that would be come out to Alice as well. Declaring functions. In Python, we say def, and then we write our function with the parentheses and then our return. We have a little bit more fluff in JavaScript. So we say function to declare this as a function. We give our function a name, and we say what parameters we'd like to pass to that function. Then we add a curly bracket, write our return statement, and then close it off with another curly bracket when we're finished. And then to call that, it's very much the same as it is in Python. We just say function name, pass it in our parameter. In JavaScript, there's also some other ways of writing or declaring a function. The most common of those is the arrow function. So this is the same function written as an arrow function. So we would just say function name, so const function name equals, open up some parentheses and type out our arguments or our parameters. Then we'd use the arrow, which is just created by typing equals and a little right arrow. My text editor does a fancy little arrow there. And then we just write our return statement directly in line there. As you get to use JavaScript more, you'll see where it makes sense to use the two different ones. The arrow function can help make your code a lot cleaner as it gets a bit more complicated. We also have conditional statements, just like in Python. Again, very similar, except we have, again, just a bit more fluff around it. We need to put our condition inside parentheses, whereas in Python, you don't need to do that. We put curly braces around each of the things that we would like to do between. Print and console log is so console log is a similar debugging tool as print. It'll show this statement in the console, which I will show you the console shortly. JavaScript makes us write the whole words. We have to say else if, we can't just say elif. And then else is the same. And just like in Python, we have loops. So loops for number in my list. That same thing here would be for, would let number of my array and would log out the number. So again, very similar. Difference there is instead of using the word in, we use the word of, and we've got those brackets and extra things around it. So very similar, just a little bit more fluff. So I mentioned there that there was some older ways of doing JavaScript things. So there is an old type of JavaScript and newer JavaScript. And it's important that we understand what old JavaScript is, rather than having to use it. It's because a lot of older code bases will be written using old JavaScript. There is still some systems that are not compatible with newer JavaScript, although that's pretty uncommon these days. And we have lots of tricks up our sleeves in JavaScript to compile the code back down to old JavaScript so that it works in that case. So we refer to newer JavaScript as ES6 or newer, and old JavaScript as ES5 and earlier. That's just in reference to the version numbers. ES5 and earlier was like a really great programming language, but it didn't have many of the newer features that other languages have, and which meant it was quite limited and got quite hard to maintain more complicated code bases. It was very easy to get yourself in a big mess with scoping your variables and things. So one of those things was that let and const that I was talking about. That puts in a guardrail in place. If we want to declare a variable that we can change, then we're going to use it as a let. If we want that variable to be constant and remain how it was originally declared, we can call it a const. So little things like that really helped making things a little bit more maintainable. So when I refer to modern JavaScript or ES6, ES6 was like a major big update that brought in all these new features. It kind of happened around 2015, so quite a while ago now, but that's the beauty of the internet. There's still plenty of the old stuff out there. But the features that it gave us were things like the let and const that I was just talking about, those arrow functions that we briefly went over in the comparison between Python and JavaScript. We got template literals, which was a way that we can now write strings that also include variables. We got some default parameters in functions, so I can call a function with some defaults already set. We can use destructuring for easy access to arrays and object values. And we've got a nice trick called promises for asynchronous programming. So that's things like fetching data from a server. JavaScript runs just straight through the file. So it'll just execute function after function after function, and it won't know to stop unless you tell it to stop and wait for something. Previously, that was only available, or only possible with some workarounds. Promises brought that into being a native feature that we can lean on. And then there's also we added classes and modules to enable object-oriented programming. There's also now, so 2015, ES6, then now we refer to ES Next, which is basically just a way of saying these are the features that are coming to JavaScript in the next release. And I believe they do it's almost an annual release now of new features. And at the moment, it's now become, they're just smaller changes. There's not many big bang changes like there was with when ES6 dropped. Now, it's good to just get across these terms, ES5, ES6, ES Next, because it will help you when talking with other developers about what's being used on a project, what features are available, and why something may not have been used. There is a tool called Can I Use, which is a website where you can type in a JavaScript feature and it will tell you whether that feature is supported on different browsers. It's quite rare now, though, that a feature isn't available. It's only maybe if you've seen something coming up in ES Next that hasn't yet been incorporated into all of the modern browsers like Edge, Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. And just on that note, there is still, and it's very common, that projects are written in ES6 or newer JavaScript, and then run through a transpiler or a compiler to convert the code back to ES5 to cover off any sort of edge cases where things might not be supported, but without us having to worry about not being able to use all the good new features. So let's have a look at what JavaScript does to a web page. It's a very basic JavaScript example, but nonetheless demonstrates. So I have a web page here with a button that says do not press. So obviously I'm going to press it. And the background color is now changing every time I press that button. Very exciting interactive website, which is pretty cool that you can just press a button and change things. But how are we doing that? We do it through the DOM. And the DOM it's a way for the browser to organize and manage the web page. So DOM stands for Document Object Model. And we can think of it like a family tree or a hierarchy of a web page. So it'll take everything on a page and sort it into a hierarchy, with each piece of that hierarchy being a different node in the page. The browser then interprets the DOM to display and update the page. So every time the web page loads, the browser will build it, and then it knows where to render each element and how to show it as well. So in that case, I was pressing the button and it was modifying the DOM. And I can show you that. 2 seconds. Okay, so if I inspect my page here, we'll just make this a little bit bigger. So you've already seen the DOM in action when you were working with CSS and HTML. So this is the DOM here. We've got our head, we've got our body, and all of our different nodes there. Now let's watch carefully what happens here when I click on the button. You see here that we've got a style tag and the background color is changing. So this is JavaScript directly writing to the DOM and saying, change the background color of that body every time someone clicks on this button. So yes, we can change the DOM with JavaScript. We can do whatever we want to the DOM with JavaScript. We can change text content. So we can put in a new heading or a new paragraph. We can update attributes. So we could replace an image as source, or we could change a link. As we've just done in the example I just showed, we can change CSS styles. We can add or remove classes to elements. So we can update the styles just by adding or removing classes. We can add or remove elements completely. And we can set up event listeners. So an event listener will listen for certain interactions, like it could be the mouse being clicked or the mouse even just being moved, and do something on that event. And there's a load more things as well. We can load in content from an API. Yeah, there's a big list of things that can be done with the DOM. But these are the main things that we're going to be doing in the course when we want to manipulate the DOM with JavaScript. So I'll just take you through quickly what that code was doing with that big red button, so we can actually see how I put that together, or rather how ChatGPT put it together for me, so I didn't need to write an example. So we've got our HTML. Let's just get rid of this extra bit there so we're not confusing things too much. So we've got our HTML file. In that HTML file, I have a button which has an ID of big red button. I've then added a script tag to the bottom of my HTML, just inside my body. And I've referenced the DOM by using the keyword document. And I've said to that in this script tag, so script being for being able to add JavaScript to a page directly. So I've called the document object and I've said, get this element by ID. So I want to search for the big red button ID, which is just here. I've then added one of those event listeners that I was talking about, and I've gone with the click. I've then added a function that just chooses a random color, does a little bit of math and converts it to a hex code. And then I call the document again, and I say on the body, because for something like the body, it's just there listed as a property. So if I just say document dot, and you can see it's one of the things that comes up in my autocomplete because it's a standard piece of the document object model. I can say document.body, then I can say .style. So I say I want to apply this style, background color, and I want that background color to be the random color that I just created here. Now, if I wanted to add a little bit extra, I could create a new div as well. And I've just given this div the ID of warning text. And when I click on the button, I also want to display a warning. So I can say document get the element by ID. And in this case, we want the warning text. And I want to set the inner HTML, so the content inside. So this bit in here. I want to set that to be, I told you not to press it. And so now if I refresh my page and I click, it's now going to say, I told you not to press it after I pressed it. So this was never written in my HTML. It was added afterwards in JavaScript. And so that's pretty much the basics of how JavaScript can manipulate the DOM and what the DOM is. Obviously, there is a lot more that I can't cover in a short session like this, but over the next few weeks in the course, you'll be doing a lot of this and a lot of the heaps more as well. And some of those things may even be covered in this advanced usage of JavaScript. So JavaScript, at its most basic level, adds interactivity to a web page. But we can also do a heap more in JavaScript, like asynchronous programming, like I was discussing a little bit earlier. That would be things like fetching your data from the external sources and then rendering it to the web page. So in your case, you could build an API in DRF, and you could use JavaScript to fetch data from that API and render it to your website. If Python doesn't end up being your cup of tea, you can also do complete full stack development in JavaScript. So because JavaScript is capable of being run on both the server and in the browser, you could use it to build an API or a backend service as well. It's also really handy for things like real-time apps. So there's a thing called JavaScript WebSockets that would enable us to build apps that require real-time interactivity. So such as instant messaging or any sort of chat type thing, or a little interactive thing where you need two people to be logged into the same browser for the same instance at the same time. And again, there's loads more that can be done with JavaScript. It's very, very versatile. A lot of the web apps that you would use would be built using JavaScript. And I've got a few of my favorite resources. I'll also share these in Slack afterwards. But all of these things are really awesome. There's the MDN web docs, which you may have been using already throughout the HTML and CSS part of the Plus program, but it's also very, very good for JavaScript. There is a great book called Eloquent JavaScript. It's getting a little bit old now, but it's still very, very relevant. has takes you through the entire language very, very well. There's also a newer series called You Don't Know JS, which is actually available if you don't want to read it as an actual book or an ebook. It's available on GitHub as open source markdown, so you can just click through and read it all. This is very in-depth. If you really want to uncover JavaScript deeply, then this is a great book to read. And then for a bit of fun, there's also the JavaScript 30 challenge, which is a website. I just opened that up, actually. It's quite cool. Apparently, I can't do that. Can't do it this way. So this is a free course that gives you 30 days of just plain vanilla JavaScript coding challenges. You can sign up and go for it. There's lots of little things you can do. You build a drum kit, a clock, toggling the page with CSS and variables. These are quite fun as well. The array cardios to learn how to manipulate arrays, which, to be honest, is what most of my job is day to day, working with JavaScript. So good practice with these. And a good part of these is they're just using what we refer to as vanilla JavaScript. So we're not using React or Angular or any of the additional frameworks on top. So you really get to learn the underlying language that you'll be using once you get into React in a couple of weeks as well. And that's everything I have for you for now, but I'm ready for any questions if you have any. That's cool. If you don't have any questions now, you might do later. So just a reminder that I posted in the chat, but in Slack, I am Ben Mentor. And yeah, you can feel free to just message me anytime or post, even better, post in the help JavaScript React channel. And I will be there. I'd lurk around there quite a bit. Happy to help you out. But cool. Awesome. You're all very welcome. All right. Well, I will leave you all to it. I'll leave you all to it. But yeah, in the meantime, feel free to reach out.
Oh, thank you.
No worries.